Thank you, Khaki Lab, and Bharat and Farooq for inviting me to deliver this talk. It's really amazing. Means I had attended Khaki tour for a really for 2 3 walks, and it was really fascinating because I belong to a community which was like one of the earliest migrants to the cities, and it is called Paskarshi community, and therefore city really is something that fascinates me every time. And it is really surprising that whenever you go for like a Khaki tour or any other heritage walk, the city never ceases to surprise you with something new that you will find or discover. And that's what I really enjoy on the heritage tours that you organize. So thank you. And just like the city, I think even business is pretty fascinating. The business history is fascinating, and in fact business is really closely related to this city, and in the making of the city, business and businessmen have played the amazing part. And but whenever you're talking about business, we often talk about mostly the entrepreneurs, mostly the business houses, but often we forget that the individuals who are making this business flourish, like there are staff, there are customers, there are distributors. So there is this whole network that actually makes business what it is. And therefore I think, when we started in the year 2006, we realized that, apart from the documents, photographs, which is the usual collection at the archives, we should not lose out on this intangible information and knowledge that the employees and whoever is associated with the company has, because that's really invaluable. And when a person leaves a company, automatically that knowledge disappears. And there is so much that you can actually take from there. There is a work culture. You can think about the values and policies, and how they actually really impacted individual lives and how individual lives impacted business. It's a very interesting kind of an interaction that one should really look at. And my title, therefore, is Business is Personal. But before I start talking about business, let me then start with personal. Why personal? Because when I was glancing through my own family collection, I won't call it archives because it's yet to be catalogued and annotated. So while going through the family collection, there were like a lot of interesting pictures of my great grandfather or my grandfather or grandmother in their office spaces with their work colleagues. And nobody, of course, know what kind of occasion these were, but these were really amazing pictures. And this one particularly really was of interest because this is some lunch party organized at the Bombay Municipal Corporation, and where my great grandfather was associated with it for really a long time, and almost like 20 years of his career he had spent at BMC as a corporator. And he was also, for like few years, he was also the chairman of the improvement committee. And here actually you can see my grandfather on the left hand side. And this particular photograph was really like quite fascinating. And people in my in my family, they will like point out, have you seen, like, Subhash Chandra Bose is also there in the picture. And this was actually the visit of Subhash Chandra Bose to BMC on 10th May 1938. Nobody knew about that date earlier, but then through the newspaper articles, then we could actually assign the date to this. And this was really amazing that, people who were working at the Bombay Municipal Corporation, what kind of work culture was there, what kind of, functions were organized. So this is really an interesting thing to look at. Means I was more interested in the spread that was on the table, but even that has a interesting history. And then there were pictures like this of my grandfather who was working as a storekeeper at Tata's Bhira hydroelectric project. And this was taken before 1954, a group photo of the staff members, and he is sitting in the middle on the chair. So this was just before he passed away. And then there is another picture of my grandmother who used to work at the Tata Share Department, and her office used to be at the Army Navy building. And in 60s, she was working lady. And this was actually one office picnic picture. And unfortunately, when I had realized the value of the archives, or when I had realized the value of oral history, my granny had already entered her 80s. My grandfather had passed away when my father was young, so I couldn't interview him. But I was also late in interviewing my grandmother because now she couldn't remember her colleagues' names, or but she could faintly remember things. And therefore, actually, I would like to tell everyone over here, if you have, want to interview someone in the family, just don't be late. Just start actually interacting with them, interview them, because even these personal stories would be really interesting, because I now just like kept wondering what kind of, how it must have been for my grandmother to work, to lead a life of a working lady in 50s and 60s. What kind of work culture she had seen, what were her colleagues doing, what were, happening at these office picnics. That would have been really an interesting tale, but I had just lost that opportunity because memory just keeps fading with the age. And that's what happened to my grandmother. And therefore, I think it is really very interesting, because otherwise it would have been really very fascinating story about the working life or the cultural history of office spaces is something I think one should look into. And that we would have just missed out if, we wouldn't have interviewed so many employees even at the Godrej company. Because it's in the offices that you spend most of your waking hours, so there is a much of life that is spent in these offices. And therefore, I think the office spaces must be like really impacting it, because business really doesn't function in vacuum. It keeps so your values, your taste, advertisements actually keep inspiring you, change your behavioral pattern, change your values, change your taste. So I think that's something which we should understand, that both impact each other. So even the company's values are formed over the period of time because of some individuals believe in something. So these are the kind of histories I think that should come out through the individual stories. So now let's stop at the personal collection that I have, and this is one iCard that you can see here, which my granny had, and we still have it in our house. But then let's come to the corporate oral history that we started in the year 2006. Now we have almost more than 340 recorded interviews with us. So when we started in 2006, we started with retired employees first, because they had already left, and they had like really amazing knowledge about, especially those who had joined in 40s and 50s in Godrej. Those we were actually started our interviews with. And then we slowly, actually now we have started interviewing people who have completed 25 years in the company. So whenever people complete 25 years, a mail goes from the archives, and then we start the interaction, and then there is a recorded interview afterwards. But that actually doesn't restrict us from interviewing those who have not completed 25 years. That also depends, if there are like very interesting projects or any interesting products that they are working on, then we also think about interviewing them once that project is finished, because then the memories are fresh. Because that's what we have realized, that once employees leave the company, they may not, because nowadays people really don't work at any company for say 25 years at a stretch, because that generation is slowly disappearing. So that's why now we have changed our strategy. So it depends on the projects, it depends on the products, and that's how we decide. And this is so in many of the interviews we keep getting very interesting thing, like this one especially is the iCard of a typewriter mechanic. And when we started doing oral history, people were really like wondering that, because this is the misconception about the business history, that it must be about the founders, it must be about the, big wigs in the company. And then we had to struggle to convince them, that no, it is your story that we are interested in. And then when, we were interacting with this Sheikh Kader, and he was really like amazed. And then he started opening up, and then he started sharing the stories. And then he said, just wait a minute, I must be having this iCard with me. And then he ran, and then he like got on the second day, I think he came up with this iCard and showed us. So then, people started feeling like they are also part of the history, and these personal narratives can actually contribute to a bigger narrative of any company. So that's how we actually started. But let me start with the just, okay. Yeah. with one interesting object that we really are always fascinated with, and that's the ballot box that Godrej created for the first election of independent India. Now, this was the only clipping. When we started in 2006, we had a very small collection. There were almost like 96 albums and 94 files that we had to start with, which were collected during the centenary celebration of the company in the year 1997. And in that collection, there was this one newspaper clipping which spoke about the ballot boxes and the 15,000 ballot boxes that were made in the first plant that was established in Vikhroli. Means Godrej started in Lalbagh in 1897, but when they started Vikhroli, this was the first plant and this was the first product that went out of Vikhroli. And then we were actually wondering who will be able to tell us the story, because this is only the record that we have, but who had really like done it. And then we were also told that there are some more records lying there at Lal Bagh, because there one phone call came and one of the employees said that there are a lot of cupboards in Lal Bagh which are locked and they still have the records. Would you like to come and see? So when we went to the Lal Bagh, and I think this building you will still see in Lal Bagh if you go there, but this was built in somewhere in 40s, and the factory sheds are little further, which were there from 1897. So we went there and we were actually crossing over a lot of these products that were lying there, a lot of documents that were lying there. And in one obscure corner, there was this ballot box. And we could have easily missed out on this because this was just one kind of a box looking thing and it was just there. But then when I went closer and I started looking at it, I'm like, this looks like a ballot box. This is smaller because in earlier days, the ballot box was smaller because for each party there would be a separate ballot box. And therefore, this is the size that you can see. And then, of course, we got it to the archives, and this is how it now looks like. And then these were the documents that we found. The blue is actually the drawing that of the locking mechanism that was designed by one of our workers, Nathalal Panchal. And this was a patented invention because the external lock was proving very expensive. So that's why this internal locking mechanism was developed. Unfortunately, we are yet to find Nathalal Panchal or his, sons or daughters. So the search is still on to find out about him. But then we actually realize that there is one person who used to, he's no more now, but in 2006, we were told that Mr. Thanewala used to head that plant. So that's where actually um, we started actually looking for it, and then somebody told us that you can meet him at his residence near Churni Road. So we went there and we interviewed him, and Mr. Thanewala has to say something like this. The recording is a little bit because it is capturing a lot of outside noises as well. So just like listen to him.
Literally making ballot boxes. Okay. When we shifted, when we all shifted there, a big order for ballot boxes came in. Okay. Plant one was. Who else? Yeah. I think, I don't know finally how many ballot boxes we ended up by making, about 15 or 17 lakhs or something like that. And at our best, I think we were producing about 22,000 ballot boxes per day. Oh. And old man Hirosha Godrej promptly there at 3 o'clock every afternoon, asking us how it is going, and we would say, no problem, sir.
So, and he then kept on saying that, how they actually went on, and even the workers were like ready to work in 3 shifts because this was really one prestigious order. And then, they had just attained the independence. So even the workers were very thrilled while making these ballot boxes at the factory. So they were ready to even like sleep in the factory shade. So that's what actually he, like started telling us. And then Pirocha Godrej will be there at 3 o'clock every day to like personally see how it is going, how much we have completed. So that was a very interesting episode that he started narrating. And then, so that's actually what, when you see a product, the product is in the exhibition, it can be on a display. But that's like really one tangible history. But there are a lot of intangible things, a lot of these emotions that actually surround these kind of products. And that's what actually help us when we start doing these oral histories. Um, and then, of course, Thanewala also really narrated one interesting thing. So we have these pictures taken by famous industrial photographer Mitar Bedi in our collection, and there were women on the shop floor. Now, if you see in 60s and 70s, in India, there were not many women that were like really hired at the shop floor doing engineering, or manufacturing anything. And then that's why we were like taken aback to see this, and then we of course checked that this is from the Malaysia plant. And then we started wondering why we started hiring women at Malaysia plant. And that's when again Thanewala gave us very interesting snippet, and he said that as a practice they started hiring men in Malaysia. And then there was one Frenchman called Rene, who was the Fiat assembly plant manager, which was an adjacent plant to the plant in Malaysia that had started in 67. That was the first plant abroad that Godrej started. And then this Frenchman Rene, he said that, are you mad that you have to employ girls in Malaysia because Malay men don't work, and women are actually more productive and they are very skilled in these things, and therefore and that's how actually they started employing girls. So how even like social fabric of a particular nation can also make companies change their policies is something can be evident from these kind of story. And then he kept on saying that when I came back, I told my locks workers that how actually my Malaysian women employees were like so productive. They could even drive a forklift truck. They can use any machine, any punching machine, or any dies they would be like setting. So that's actually quite a proud that he was, that something that he had witnessed at Malaysia. Talking about women employees, there was another interesting episode that we came across was Mrs. Mani Thakur, and she had really lovely storytelling kind of a ability, and she started narrating a lot of interesting things because she was the first lady to be appointed at the Delhi branch in Godrej, and she joined Godrej on 3rd January 1956 initially as a receptionist. But then there was a replacement basis. There was one vacancy. The person in showroom had quit, and nobody was there to take care of the showroom. So she said that then she was offered, and then eventually she went into sales and became the store chief. So that was quite a journey for a person who had joined as a receptionist and then becomes the store chief in Delhi. So it was really fascinating to see her career. And very interesting episode that she told us was when she was expecting a child, and she keeps saying that office was like a family. So one of her colleagues suggested that you have to apply for a leave now. So when she approached the branch manager there, Dr. Hati, he said that we have no rules so far because we have never employed women. So and then just check with the head office. So she called head office. There was one Mr. Sahuka who was the general manager at that point of time, and he said that why don't you go to labor court and just collect the information that what kind of maternity rules are existing. So that's how she went, and then she got the information, and that's how the leave was given to her. So it was really very interesting to see, when the women started coming into the workforce, what kind of policies had to be changed, what kind of policies were existing at that point of time. And then, very interestingly, she gave us this photograph, which was really quite amazing. Um, she as a telephone operator and a receptionist, she was there, and this was a very lovely picture that she shared with us. So even that happens. So whenever you start interacting with people, they feel like belonging to the history of the company as such. They feel like they have played some major role in the company's history. They feel that kind of a contribution that they have made, and they also start contributing to the archives, uh, you know by way of sharing their personal collections or the memories that they had kept with them of their office lives. And one such diary that came to us was by one of our plant manager, Mr. KB Gupte, who was an engineer, a mechanical engineer. And this was a diary. So when I had interviewed him, he said that I have few diaries with me. So I was really like puzzled, what he might be really like noting down in these diaries. And he came up with these diaries, which was really amazing because he has really neatly put, drawn these diagrams. There was like very neatly written, very technical details were like quite nicely written and in very nice handwriting. And then he started telling me a story that Godrej started manufacturing typewriters in the year 1955, and Godrej was the first company, Indian company, to manufacture the typewriters at that point of time. In fact, Godrej also advertised it as India can make it. So today we have these kind of slogan, but that's how even Godrej advertised it in 1950s. And then he started saying that how the first two models were very complicated, and they were, we were not getting very good feedback on them. And interestingly, he has also kept the diaries of the feedback that he used to collect from different customers across India. So he had gone to Hyderabad, and in the year 1959 he makes a note in the diary saying that they were not really satisfied with the performance of our M9 model, and they are requesting that why not we go back to our M8 model. So these are the kind of discussions that you see in one of the diaries that he had maintained, and very detailed, the person's names that he had met, which department, which company, and what kind of difficulties they have with our machine, what kind of improvements that we can offer. So all these things he had really recorded, and it's really amazing. So after the feedback wasn't really good for the first two models, Godrej thought of a collaboration with a German company called Web Optima. And some of the engineers were sent to Germany, which was the East Germany at that point of time. And Mr. Gupte was one of them. And when he was sent there, there were no technical documents that were exchanged between the two companies. So what he had to do is like observe whatever is happening in that factory and then note down everything that he can there. And that's the diary that he actually then shared with us. And this is really very interesting because Web Optima, being a German company, they were also manufacturing the Devanagari script. And this is how actually the typeface had to be like, all the measurements related to it were like neatly written down by Mr. Gupte. And then, in fact, few years back, his daughter and his son visited our archives just to see these diaries, and they were really like quite thrilled to see this. And it's very interesting that how archives can also play a role in these kind of making these kind of connections with the family. So that's actually was quite heartwarming for us to see that people want to come and see what their father had done or mother had done in that company, which was quite amazing. I'll share one more story about that little later. But these are some of the diaries that actually came to us because of these personal stories. And then he also explained to us how it was living in Germany at that point of time, how he was put up with one family, and then how the interactions were about, say, religion, about the philosophies, about the values. So it was very interesting to see how this kind of interaction also happens when somebody is sent to a foreign country and then he has to like live there for a certain period of time. So this is really one cultural exchange that also then he spoke about during this interview. So just like every typewriter was quite a path breaking thing for Godrej. And this actually we realized when we were interacting with one our present the current business head of Godrej Aerospace, Mr. SM Vaidya. And we were interacting with him that how we actually started or forayed into the space industry and how we started working with ISRO. And just casually I asked him, what is your favorite product? So I was actually under the impression that he will say, because he manufactures satellite components, he manufactures like engines for the launch satellite launching vehicles that we manufacture. So I was like rather expecting another answer, but he said, I love typewriter. And then I was like taken aback. And then I asked him that, why typewriter? So he said that for the first time, Godrej moved away from sheet metal work to the very complex machine which had almost 2000, 3000 parts working simultaneously to produce a result. And that's something actually was a starting point for Godrej into precision engineering, because they were really tiny parts. We were never used to do that before 1955 because we were manufacturing locks, cupboards, and safes, which had like mostly the sheet metal kind of a work is involved. So he said typewriter was therefore quite a breakthrough for us. And that's how actually we got the confidence in precision engineering, which eventually, if not directly, led to our participation or our contribution to the space industry along with ISRO. And then there was this story that actually came to us. So here actually you can see also Abdul Kalam, who was at that point of time working at DRDO in 90s. Um, and there is one Mr. Datar, whom you can see over here, who was the plant manager at the process equipment division. And he then started narrating us that how indigenously, because Godrej has its foundation in Swadeshi principles, and that's how Ardeshir Godrej started it. And you can see actually with the changing times, you can also see a different kind of a maybe interpretation of this principle that you can see keep happening throughout the period. So this is also one interesting story that he narrated to us because ISRO had suggested to buy an expander which gives a conical shape to the engine that we manufacture for the satellite launching vehicles. And ISRO had suggested to buy it from the US because it would be easier. But then it was costing almost 4.5 crores. And then he started negotiating. He started talking to this company and the people in that company about the drawings, about the engineering and how it is actually done. And then he realized that, oh, okay, this, I have the toolings in Godrej and I can actually do this kind of a machine. Though the US company wasn't really like sure that, Godrej would be able to make it in house. But then later on, Data came back and then he actually explained it to the engineers and they made the expander. And Godrej was one of the very few companies in India that has this kind of a technology. I think only two, I think only one company in India at that point of time to have this kind of a technology. So you can actually see that when ISRO had started, so there is also a parallel history that you can actually learn when you're interviewing people. And this is really an amazing space saga of India that actually talks about how ISRO actually started looking for Indian partners or partners in Indian companies where actually these kind of technologies can be developed indigenously. So this is the experiment that started with, and then of course, Godrej had now actually manufactured more than 100 Vikas engines and cryo engines for our launching vehicles. Now, these are the products which are not very known to common people because Godrej is mostly known for locks, refrigerators, and cupboards. And that's what Mr. H.N. Khambata, one of our other plant manager, he said that I have in fact never worked I have worked with everything except for locks, typewriters, and refrigerators. So it is really interesting to see what kind of other products that Godrej was part of and that had contributed to the city's history as well. Um, so this is a very interesting business that Godrej was associated with for a very brief period of time, only 2 decades in 60s. And this was actually the city's skyline was changing at that point of time. There were a lot of high rises coming up. Nariman Point was coming up. You can see here offices like Express Tower, Air India that was coming up. Trident, you can see over here. And Godrej actually was into this business of architectural fabrication and supplying aluminum fabrication for windows, doors, and ventilators. So if you can see here on the top, there is uh, means today's Trident, but the Oberoi was there at that point of time. So all the windows and the door fabrication, the aluminum panels were provided by Godrej. And even the TIFR that you can see the four pictures below, even the louvers are quite a fascinating architecture of TIFR, and they are really very proud in showcasing that architecture. And these louvers made of like aluminum, they were also manufactured by Godrej. Even for Air India, Express Tower, they were also supplied with the whole aluminum fabrication for doors and windows and everything. So this is very interesting contribution that Godrej made. And not just that, when the Cyrus reactor was being built at BARC, uh, Godrej actually provided double aluminum cladding for the dome structure of the Cyrus reactor. And these are the stories that actually then Mr. Khambata and others actually started sharing with us, that how this business was actually quite an interesting business. And but then of course later on these kind of technologies disappear, so even the businesses have, the shelf life of the business is also depending on that. So these are like really very interesting stories, and then you can see how the products that Godrej or any business make can also be part of really a larger narrative of how the city's architecture is changing, or how the nation's technological advances is changing. So everybody is playing their role. So individual stories, individual companies, they have part to play in the larger narrative as well. And then we, of course, have other stories about how actually people at that point of time were responding to the technological changes that were happening at the offices. And this was one interesting thing, because I used to remember, means I remember that I used to accompany my aunt who used to work in BMC. And she was part of the computer department, and I used to be like, it was like late 80s. I was really a little kid, and whenever I used to go there, that was the only room which was air conditioned. So I remember that, there were like huge computers, because the PC had not come at that point of time. And there were huge computers with all those magnetic tapes. And it was really one fascinating thing for a kid like me. And I used to spend, because I wanted to experience air condition room. So that was one reason, but it was amazing to see that kind of a technology for the first time. So even in Godrej, we were actually just interacting with few people that, when the computers were introduced, when we started having our payrolls or other billing kind of information on the data cards, on the computer, how actually these processes change. So what we are interested in, not just the history of the product, but also processes and how they impact, or how the responses are to this technology when something is introduced in the company. And then we actually met Mr. Devdhar, who was part of this computer service department, as it was called. And then he said that the first machine that was installed was by ICL, which was International Computers and Tabulators, which was a UK company. And only IBM and ICL at that point in time, or ICT as it was known as in India. So these two companies were only there, which were supplying the computers for these kind of things. So he actually spoke about that, how the installation was, how the training was, how difficult it was to gather such information, then put it on the data cards, and when you have to really struggle with the memory, which was just 32 bytes. And so this is the maximum that they could go, and today we talk about TB, GB, and so on and so forth. And at that time they were really like struggling. So what kind of struggles there were, how actually they were coping with this kind of a demand by the technology. Then he also spoke about the programming language that they have to learn, which was Plan. So if somebody is really interested in how the history of technology had evolved, these are the things, and how people responded to it would be really very interesting thing to look at. And these were the pictures again from the Mr. Bedi collection that we have in our archives. And these are really lovely pictures of those machines that were installed, and how actually then later on the payroll was became much easier, even the billing became easier. So that actually, is quite an interesting episode to think about. As I was talking about billing, so obviously, I would now like to talk about the distribution channels and the networks and the dealers who played a part in the company's role. And by 70s, actually, the dealers network of Godrej started expanding, and through these dealers, actually, Godrej could penetrate into really like very farthest corners of the country. And this is very, means I actually enjoyed interviewing a few dealers in the Northeast, and he is from Dibrugarh. And he actually had really very interesting stories because his grandfather, uh, he actually came from Rajasthan when the oil was struck in Assam. That was like in late 19th century. And I don't know how, but then even when there was no Google, when there was like no really radio as such for the common people, how a person sitting in Rajasthan just came to know about the oil business, and then leaves Rajasthan and comes to Assam. and then go to Dibrugarh and start with like selling little pots of oil that he could get from these oil excavation sites. And that's how his great grandfather started the business. And then eventually they started working in the motor and then motor business, and then they became dealers for Godrej. So this becomes really very fascinating thing, because then it becomes not just the Godrej story, but also a story of an entrepreneur. And there are like so many entrepreneurs around, and you can actually really have like very interesting conversations about their success stories and how the businesses. So this was really for me the fascinating story of migration as well, that how a person in Rajasthan just decides to come to Assam when he just hears that there is oil struck in Assam. So it is really amazing. And then Vikas Modi actually went on telling us that how it was before insurgency happened in Assam, how difficult it was when it was, insurgency really started hitting them. And, it was really very difficult to even like send the uh, tempos or trucks full of products. And then, there will be delays in the delivery. And this wasn't so before 1990. And he said that, we can just, leave the car with the keys and nobody would remove or nobody would steal. And suddenly with the insurgency, everything changed. They also moved to Calcutta, and then they only started operating remotely from there. And even one of the branch manager also shared with us that they have to like take into consideration delivery delays when insurgency really started. So it is really interesting to see how even these external events can really impact the businesses. Means now in today's COVID affected world, we know how suddenly everything comes to a standstill and how it can really impact the economy. So maybe that's the future history that we also need to write, and how actually we should start documenting businesses during COVID is something that we should think about. Talking about businesses, actually, when we were interacting for the typewriter history, one of the dealers in Delhi, Mr. Rajesh Palta, he actually shared really interesting stories that how before partition, his maternal grandfather had started, the sales service in Remington in the year 1942, and it was in Lahore. And then after the partition, his father started the Universal Typewriters in Delhi, and then he shared a lot of these interesting workshop pictures and the sales team of Remington. So this was really very interesting history. So when it is, so we had decided that even though we were documenting the history of typewriters, we didn't want to restrict ourselves to Godrej, because there is a larger narrative of a typewriter as a product. And then these are the little stories that also became part of it. So these are the things that really makes a product history interesting, because after all, product is reaching humans and the humans are interacting with it. And that's how actually even this story is like really fascinating for us. And Mr. Tamhane, he is no more now. And in fact, when this cupboard arrived at the archives, he had already passed away, but we were chatting with him, interacting with him for almost a year for this cupboard. And he said that, he wants to give this back to the archives, because this is the memory he wants to preserve. And this is his mother's mother. Actually, his mother got this as a gift in a wedding in 1930. They don't know the date, but this is the stowell. This is not actually the stowell, but this is the Godrej steel cupboard as it was known as then. So this was with the round mirror, and this was a lovely piece. And and then he had passed away, but then his wife told us that how when there was like the huge dam was collapsed in Kamshet and whole Pune was flooded, this actually cupboard survived. Even the mirror is the original one, and everything got survived and clean. So that's the letter that she actually sent us, talking a little about this history, the family history of the this cupboard. So how actually it traveled from like Satara to from Bombay to Satara, from Satara to Pune, and still it survived till like it came to the archives few years back. So these are some of the little stories and the product stories that really makes our history really fascinating. And then this was one another interesting product that came to us. This is actually a prototype of a Godrej steel cupboard, And Miss Yasmin Homa Wazir, she actually handed over this prototype. And her father, who used to work in the service department, he had actually seen this prototype lying in Lalbagh for many years, and nobody was really doing anything about it. So he like really mustered up the courage and went to Piroj Shah, and he asked for the permission when he was retiring to take it home. And that's how it came. And she also said that Piroj Shah in fact asked him to like paint it, clean it, and then take it. So this was, lying with them, with the family for many years. And then she was actually initially was hesitant that whether she should part away with such a memory that her father has preserved for so many years. But then she said that this will be preserved in the archives, and as a in memory of her father, if you can keep it at the archives. So that's how actually this little bird, which is like some 1 feet tall, but it's very heavy because this was the prototype that they had made. Must be in 40s. They must have made this before the store whale was introduced. So this is actually quite an amazing product, and I think these little stories about the product makes the product more interesting. Or even like stories about the refrigerator. People, this model actually you can still find in many people's home, which is a model 7A of a refrigerator, which was introduced in late 60s. And people, the middle classes in Bombay have started buying this somewhere around like late 60s and 70s. And this was actually given to us by Dr. Makarand and Dr. Sandhya Vaingankar. And when actually we went there to take the possession of this refrigerator, they actually said, like, it's like a family member living home, because this was there in their home for like 3 decades. And it was bought in like more than actually 3 decades, because this was bought in 1963 by their father, who was a doctor and who had served in the Second World War. And after he came up, he set up his practice in Chira Bazar, and he used to keep medicines in this fridge, and kids were not allowed to touch it. So if they want anything cold from there, then they had to ask their father. And these are the stories that they started telling us about the refrigerator. And then of course, they really, like, before they sent it to us, they posed with it, they photographed themselves with the refrigerator. And this kind of a connection, I was really like thrilled to see that, that a person was so emotional about a product that was there. And that's why I think it makes the business history really quite fun. I think I'm now like almost near the conclusion, but this is again the story that we always, because the products reach to you, but then those people who are actually loading these products, taking it to your home, these are the things that actually we really don't think about, that what are their stories. And this was one whole community that migrated from a village called Padarewadi near Pune. And this whole community migrated somewhere in 40s to Bombay to work with Godrej, and the entire community started working with Godrej as loaders. And this is the photograph of the first batch that we could get from their village when we visited their village, just to understand their stories. Because of the uncertainty of rain, they couldn't continue farming, so that's when they started searching for jobs in the cities, and that's how they landed over here. And then we had nothing but this photo about the Navganis, as they are called. And therefore last year we actually, only through oral history interviews, we created one exhibition on them, just to give them tribute and just to recognize their contribution to the company, as for 4 generations they are like working with Godrej. And this was an amazing thing, and they also felt really involved in that whole creation of the exhibition, because they were the people who were also like getting us all these boxes for the exhibition. So they actually felt really involved, and for the first time they felt that they are also part of this history, and they had done something amazing, is what they started feeling. So this is actually available on YouTube. If you go to our Godrej Archives YouTube channel, their story we have uploaded, so I won't play it here. And then there were like service mechanics who come to you to repair your cupboards, or find your keys. So this is the kind of thing, and this is one phone call came from Gujarat. And this gentleman said that, I have some of the old soap packaging with me, would you like to come and see? And they were just ready to give it away. So when we went there, Mr. Jayan Panchal, he started narrating stories about his father-in-law, who is Ambaram, and who used to work with Delhi branch as a safe mechanic. And as a rule in the family, he would make everyone use only Godrej products. And that's why he has also kept even these Godrej soap packaging from 30s and 40s, even, till he passed away. And when he passed away, when they were like going through the collection that he had like collected over the period of time, Mr. Jayan Panchal came across these packaging and his iCard of Godrej, and then he called us saying that would you like to just take it? And they really didn't really want anything in exchange, and they said no, we just want to keep it as a memory of my father-in-law and my wife's father. And then he started narrating that how was actually called to even repair a safe at Jawaharlal Ji's residence. Now we don't know exactly, but how this happened or whether it has happened. But these are the stories that I think from generation to generation, I think families keep passing on about their parents, and this is really amazing that they have these stories with them, and we can actually have this just as like some of the really interesting things at the archives. And he also said that he used to go to Rashtrapati Bhavan because he was really a very good with safe mechanic, and he was like most sought after in Delhi branch. And then he also said that once even the few dacoits actually came to him saying that they had just they had stolen one Godrej safe, but they could not open it up, and they offered him some 5,000 for the job, but he said that even if you pay me 1 million, I'm not going to break that open until there are like instructions from Godrej. So these are the kind of stories which talks about people's values and how they had actually seen their lives as. So this is really very interesting, and that make even our task more interesting, to like look at the different multiple voices that are there and multiple histories that are there around the one name Godrej or the company. So I would almost like at my last story. And this was also, means how I was actually telling you about how families feel connected, just like Jen Panchal talking about his father-in-law. We just got a call from Amanda engineer who works at Wellcome Trust in London. She said my father briefly worked at Godrej in 50s, and she said, means I met her at one conference and she just said this, and she said, if I'm coming to India, would you be able to show me the documents which might, like have reference about him? Because she would be interested because she doesn't know much of his life in India. Because when he moved to London, she doesn't know. Then we actually, started going through our collection. Then we also asked our corporate HR, who still has few of the old files they keep in their records. So we went there, we went through the records, and we actually found these. And one of our corporate HR person actually helped us in locating this file, which was about her father, Mr. HK Engineer. So this was one application letter he has written. This was the interview call that was sent to him. So these are the some of the things that were, and then of course the appointment letter. So when she came to the archive, she was so thrilled to see that this is where my father worked, and she gave us this picture that he had taken at Lal Bagh, or his colleague, his friend has taken at Lal Bagh, where he's just posing with two phones, just showing that he's so busy working. And that's what actually she narrated with us. He was just like posing, and this was really lovely picture that you can see taken at the Lal Bagh office. And later on, we actually found very interesting thing. Now that IPL fever is on, I thought let's end it with the cricket thing. So this was one picture that we showed her, where below on the extreme right, he is shown sitting. Her father is there, and she said, "Oh, I didn't know that he ever played cricket." So that was quite amazing for her, that that he was part of the Godrej team. And this actually brings me to another interesting aspect of the city's sports culture at that point of time. And I think Farooq mentioned about how sport was like intimately connected with the city. And this is where we actually found later on these kind of things from our Godrej Staff Club files. There used to be a small club that was called Godrej Staff Club, and they used to participate in times of India Challenge Shield cricket tournament, which used to happen. And there were offices competing with each other. So State Bank of India, Central Bank of India, GS Medical College, Bombay Municipal Sports Club. So they used to actually have competition among themselves. Godrej also used to participate, and they also have to like hire grounds at Parsi Gymkhana. So we got these like little letters and interactions and correspondence between Bombay Gymkhana and these things. Or even there was like, what kind of things that would be provided when you will hire the ground. So there are like little these bills. So this gives us like really an interesting flavor of how sports was part of the working culture, even like till late 80s. That I have seen that, carom tournaments, table tennis tournaments. So a lot of these tournaments used to happen in between like a lot of offices around there. So this is really one interesting aspect that one should actually write more about, that how these kind of sports in office spaces used to really happen, and what kind of role it used to play in strengthening the bond with employees, and how the whole working culture used to be. Means today we talk about these words like engagement in HR, but then these are the things that were really happening in 60s and 70s and 80s. And I think somebody should write about these kind of interactions and these kind of exchanges that were happening then. And so we also like interacted with few sports enthusiasts in our company, and they actually came up with so many interesting stories about not just cricket but hockey. And then these were like pictures that they shared with us, that they had in their personal collection whenever they had like represented Godrej and uh, you know had won some prizes. So here you can see Mr. Franklin Sumitra, whom we had interviewed separately again, receiving an award from Polly Umrigar, N.B. Rane with Sunil Gavaskar, Gupte with Sachin Tendulkar. So these are like, so they also felt really like proud to share, the achievements that they had in sports, and they really felt recognized, through these kind of interviews and interactions. So these are the things that actually really enrich the history that you're doing at business. So then business becomes not just one corporate entity, but it really becomes representative of human connections. And it is also so, like Rob Perks, who is an oral historian at British Library, says that corporates are people too. So I think that's what actually we try and do at the archives, that apart from the documents and things, even these stories really matter, and they are to be preserved. And they are preserved in the archives along with the documents and the photographs. So this is the little glimpse of the Godrej archives that I would like to give you. And this is the exhibition area that we have, where once, of course, the pandemic is over, then you're all welcome to even visit us. Uh, we are there on the social media as well. So this is what we do, apart from archiving the documents and the photographs. That's all from me. And
Really fascinating, Vrinda. I think two anecdotes which you narrated really drove home for me that business is indeed personal. When somebody, I don't know if it was you or somebody else, was interviewing Mr. Thanewala, and the interviewer says, "Was this plant one?" You could see the pride in his voice, and he said, "Of course, where else?" And the second one was when you were talking about the gentleman from the aerospace division, a big frontier of technology kind of thing. And he harks back to the humble typewriter and how he sort of honed his teeth on a not so glamorous business, if I may say so. Uh, okay, let's look at the questions now. Somebody wanted to know if people are free to visit the archives. You've answered that by saying that you're welcome after the things ease up. Yes. The other question from Parvez was any plans to come out with a coffee table book?
Oh, okay. We had actually come up with one
Yes.
coffee table book so far, which is on the typewriter's history.
Yes.
So that book on typewriter's history, title with Great Truth and Regard, is available on Amazon, and that was published in
Correct.
2016. So we actually started with the product history, because Godrej history was written long time ago when the centenary celebrations
Correct.
were there in 1997, when B.K. Karanjia wrote Godrej story in
Yes.
2 volumes.
Yeah.
But then when we started, we thought that, let's talk about even the products and how actually then we can make it like a more like a cultural narrative of the product.
Okay.
So we have done that, and now we are working on seating in India, which hopefully would be published next year, which is about the seating as a culture, how it has evolved over a period of time. So again, it will be a larger narrative than just the Godrej chair. So yeah,
Okay.
so that's in pipeline. So yeah,
That will be really interesting.
yes,
I suppose it's look at office furniture,
yes,
office
yes.
chairs. Yeah.
Office chairs and tables and even home chairs. Yeah, home
Okay.
furniture as well. Yeah.
Okay. Nice. Another question from Parvez was: Is Godrej the pioneer in India in having an archiving department?
No, actually, Tata had pioneered. So Tata Central Archives was the first archives. They have completed 25 years. Even Reserve Bank of India, if it's a bank archives, but you can say that there are even RBI is quite an old archives. It is again more than 25 years old. They started in 80s. SBI has a museum. DCM Shriram also had started, but I can say that as far as the corporates are concerned, we are the second after Tata to start
Okay.
our archives formally. Yeah.
Yes. And there's another one. Oh, actually, it's a question from me. Who actually owns all the material which is being archived? Is the custodianship with the businesses, or is it with your department, your team?
So go means archives is actually always a custodian unless and until we are creating a record. So when it comes to us, the ownership still lies with the business who has created the record. So that's how actually the copyright works. But Godrej Archives being the part of the company, it is preserving everything for the businesses. As far as the individual oral histories are concerned, copyrights belong to the interviewee. They give us the ownership rights for the edited version of the transcripts.
Okay.
So those are the things which we have to be careful of, because they have given us the interview, so they have the right over that information that they had shared with us, putting trust in us. So yeah.
And I
So it
must say,
depends. Yeah.
your archives are very generous in sharing that information for publications. You
Oh
know
yes,
what
yes, yes,
instance I'm referring to.
yes, yeah.
Yeah. And it was a great thing that you included the delivery men, the support system, the supply chain people. That I it was eye opener to say the least.
Mhm.
Is the history of the staff housing and the community housing at Vikhroli, is that documented?
Oh yes,
Guys,
yes, it is documented. In fact, one of my ex-colleague, she had in fact worked on that project. So that is not published yet, but we have documented the whole evolution and the whole, setting up of the whole industrial township in Vikhroli. So all those records are with us. So yes.
okay. Um, I think that brings us to to an end of all the questions. Except there are lots of compliments. I wish all corporates would do this. Such records collated together would make a fascinating museum, as a
Oh
comment
yes.
from Jatin.
So now many companies have started doing that, which is I'm really glad to see that a lot of corporates are interested, and a lot of them have already started sharing some of their collection on social media as well. So yeah, so it is.
So, in your opinion, does a business have to be of a particular size to start an archive? If
I
not,
don't think so. I don't think so, because it's better to start when it's young, because then you have like a grip over all the documents and photographs. Because when it becomes bigger, means that's the challenge that we are facing, because we are already 123 years old company. Then we have so many businesses and spread across like all over the globe. So that becomes like, the whole like volume becomes a challenge. When you have like a really small team, so it's better that, however small it is, or even like a family. I mean, sometimes we really don't respect our own stories,
exactly.
in the same regard. If there is a letter written by Nehru or signed by Nehru, we give it a value. But when it is like, maybe our grandmother has written to our grandfather, even that letter has some kind of an, value in our own way. So I think, it doesn't matter whether it has to be of like a bigger size or a smaller size, but it, when you feel like archiving, just start doing it. So that's how I will put it.
So, suppose I'm talking about a small business, well established. where should it make a beginning if it were to record its history?
Okay, that's quite a
Okay, it
difficult
was.
question.
I
Yeah.
know, I know.
Yeah.
You can't do justice to it in a short
No,
while.
means when
Yes.
we actually started, what we did a very simple thing in the first year, we just jotted down the milestones for every business and we started searching for if there are records pertaining to at least the milestones. Then
Mm-hmm.
eventually, once we started getting that, then we went more deeper and deeper. So, and then we realized that, let's not like go like always like 123 or 50-year-old record. Even if it's like 2-year-old record, let's start searching for it. So now we have like a system where every day, whatever triggers that we get from the internet about what we are doing, we just send it to the businesses that okay, we have got that you are doing all these things, so just send us the information, or if you have like introduced a product, just send us the catalog. So I think catching them young is also, I think, the great thing,
Yes.
because sometimes after 10 years, because now employees keep changing like over every 2 years, so then
Yeah.
it becomes very difficult to get hold of a record. So it's better that whenever it is being created, if you can just tap it and like keep it in. But of course that is the challenging part, but yeah, I mean that's how we have tried to simplify it, but yeah, it's very difficult.
So a milestone would be a good beginning in your view.
Milestone would be a good beginning. Yeah.
Okay. I see the name of your company in the list of attendees. Mrs. Godrej, would you like to say a few words, please?
Thank you, Farooq. Vrunda, that was a really, really interesting talk. I've had a big complaint that you didn't put it out to all of us in the family. So I'm going to have to apologize to them. But it was very, very interesting. And we have really, Farooq and everyone on the team, benefited by, all of us have little hoarding habits. But the biggest hoarder in our family was the late Sorabji Godrej. He
Mhm.
kept everything. He used to write with a little pencil, I think something he inherited from Gandhiji, and it was little scraps of paper. He had his own form of shorthand, whether it was reprimanding us for not having parked the car correctly in our parking place or whatever. But he collected a lot. And, as Vrunda said, recording oral history, she wishes she had spoken to her grandmother when her grandmother was, coherent and could share stories with her. Um, I wish I had spent more time with SPG as a younger person, although he never had the time. He was always traveling and busy with so many activities. But he really, really documented in his own fashion. And we were so grateful that he shared everything with Mr. B.K. Karanjia.
Yes.
And I remember even, what was it, Vrunda? 20 years, 25 years ago, when you talked about Lal Bagh,
Yes.
they were really going to throw things out because they needed to clean up the space and reutilize it. And it took a lot of persuasion that no, shift it from wherever you want to do a new business and bring it up to an upper level. And I think we found some 10 or 12 safes which we just couldn't move. So they stayed on the ground level. So I think sometimes it's good to forget, and then when you're ready, it appears. So I think it was marvelous, Farooq. You have invited Vrunda. She's done a lot of work at the
Oh
archives.
yeah.
And she keeps telling us, and she told you all today, it's a very small team, small team. But whenever we meet, I said, whatever was done yesterday, that's history for the business. But for us, it's very important to collect it, whatever it may be. So I think, you said, which is milestones, yes, but start today so that somewhere the two will meet and, and connections will be made. Thank you. Thank you very
Thank you
much.
for giving
Thank
that
you.
overall perspective.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vrunda. Thank you, Mrs. Godrej.